Mims Henstorf, and I'm going to introduce to you Beth and Randall Apperson. We're going to talk about the years of the 30s. Okay, what would you consider to be just an ordinary day when in your younger time, when you know it's 8, 7, whatever you can remember, when you get up?
When we got up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess hadn't thought about that. I know my mother was one for everybody ate breakfast, but I don't remember what we had for breakfast. I do remember that as a child that I liked to send for things from cocoa wheats and things like that. So apparently we ate cereal. And I'm sure we always had milk because we had our own cows and but I don't remember having eggs particularly for breakfast.
Well, I remember we had oatmeal a lot,
Okay.
and we had eggs occasionally because we did have chickens, and we milked cows. And I guess the main thing I remember was I liked to play with toys.
So what kind of toys did you have then?
Well, I'm a farmer, so I had tractors that I played with.
Okay.
My brother and I, like folks used to say, there was never any grass under the trees because we always kept it farmed out.
So now would they be like the pedal tractors that we see sometimes,
No,
or they were
little
just
toy
miniature?
little
Okay.
toy tractors.
Okay. And Beth, what kind of toys did you have? Remember?
Paper dolls.
That's right. I liked paper dolls better than I did dolls, really. And another thing I liked was tea sets. I liked to play with like tea time or something like that. And I'm sure I had dolls, but they weren't my favorite. I remember having a wagon that I pulled, but mostly it probably was paper dolls and the tea sets, that sort of thing.
Okay. And you both were growing up on your farm, on a family farm?
My
Or were you
parents
in town?
moved quite a bit, so I was in town, I was on a farm. It just depends on what year you're at.
Okay. So what was your noon meal like then? I know when I first moved to Iowa, the noon meal was the big meal of the
Yes.
day for
Usually meat
farmers.
and potatoes, usually gravy, some sort of vegetable, might be whatever was available. Like if it was in the summer, it would be what was fresh. And but my mother canned a lot, so we had vegetables that way. My mother did bake, but I can't remember exactly what we had for dessert. But we did have quite a few fruit trees, so I'm sure it was probably fruit of some sort. Mhm.
Well, we had a garden also and kind of raised out of the garden, and usually potatoes was a good part of our noon meal. And I guess that's about all I can.
Did you have beef then from cattle that you had raised, or?
We never had much beef. We had mostly pork.
Okay.
Because I remember in the fall, Dad and my uncles, they would butcher a hog and had the big iron kettles, that they built fire under, and they'd scald them, and they'd usually hang in the barn overnight. So that would be in the kind of the fall of the year when it's cooler anyway.
Okay,
And then
so did you have a job to do when they butchered, or?
Watched them. But then I also remember that we'd cut the hams up, and Dad would go down in the cellar, and they had this Morton salt, and he would rub into these hams to cure them, and I remember that.
My mother raised a lot of chickens always, so we had a lot of chicken to eat. I do remember that, whether it was fried chicken or stewed chicken or baked chicken. And my mother even canned chicken at that time.
Okay,
And I know there were some people that canned beef, but I don't remember that my parents did. But we were kind of like his. It was probably more chicken and pork than it was beef.
okay. And then did you have some chores around that you had to do?
Not that I remember. I'm sure I probably did. I know when they dressed chickens, I mostly watched too, I think. I don't remember doing anything like that, no.
Fine. What about school? How was it country school and you went there, or some of the times you were in town? No, but
For my first grade and second grade, I went to country school. The first one was North Star, which is, well, it's pretty hard to, it's kind of north and west of Northborough. And in my second grade, I went to Union Star, which was Union Grove, which was just west of Northborough. And I was real close to Union Grove, so it wasn't far to walk. It was about a little over a mile to walk to North Star. And I guess we remember the cold times, you know, when the snow and things like that. But and I remember we, of course, always took our lunch, usually a paper sack, and we played different games. I remember fox and geese in the winter, and Andy over then, usually when we could be outside, you know, when it was nice enough to throw balls around. So.
And then you just walked to school? Then?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Either that or someone took us, but I mostly walked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to West Point School, which was about a mile from where we lived. And I can remember one, and it must have been 36, because we had about 3/4 of a mile that was level ground before we came to a hill. And I got about halfway across this ground, and my sister, older sister, and I got so cold I started crying. And she said, "Well, you big sissy, just turn around and go back home," and I did. And I remember walking over fences. I mean, snow drifts so high that...
Because 36 was the year of those
Yeah,
blizzards,
that
wasn't it?
you just, fences was nothing. I mean,
So all winter long, just...
But I can remember that one special time that I got so cold. Well, my sister kind of frostbit her feet and that.
Mhm.
But she made school, but I didn't.
And what about your folks and taking care of the livestock during that time?
Well, I had chores, usually gathering the eggs, and then a lot of times we milked, I think, 3 and 4 cows at a time, and I'd usually put the feed in there, and we had a few hogs, and I'd usually feed the hogs too. And I can remember one time gathering eggs. We had a chicken house, not real big, but there was nests across one end of it, and of course it was after school, and I reached in and got a hold of a big bull snake.
And apparently you won.
I don't know whether I gathered eggs very long after that or not, but I'm sure I did. But and then our chickens used to kind of lay different places, you know. And I remember one Easter that they laid eggs down in the barn. And I remember Easter morning going down the barn, and there were some colored Easter eggs. That was quite a long time, I believe. They. But I remember that.
So that was a good celebration.
Yeah.
So what about other holidays? Can you remember how you celebrated the holidays?
Well, I was reading my baby book there, and I guess I don't remember really anything too outstanding about the holidays. I mean, Christmas was kind of, well, we usually got some clothing, and that was kind of a little candy too, and an apple or some fruit. That was.
So was the clothing store-bought, or did your
I think
mother
it
make
was
it?
store-bought,
Okay.
and some of it could have been made too. But, and then when I was a kid, we didn't come to Shenandoah, which would have been about 15 miles. We didn't come to Shenandoah too often. My dad was kind of around the Westboro area, and that was about 5 miles from us, and we spent a lot of time in Westboro on Saturday nights. The stores closed when everybody went home. And I remember going to the movie down there, and it was 75 cents for the whole family.
For everyone.
Yeah, for everyone. And there was 5 of us all together.
So most of the farmers then in the area then
Yeah.
went into Westboro.
And they had a few
And-
benches there, and they'd sit and visit, and pretty soon, and we'd usually take some produce to town, and when the money was gone from the produce, that's how many groceries we bought.
So did you go there in the morning or after
In the
chores were
evening.
done pretty much, or?
In the evening,
Okay.
that's when they had their movie, was on
Okay.
Saturday evening.
And so you sold your vegetables or
Yeah.
whatever you had and then picked up what you
We
needed?
sold mostly cream
There
and
was a
eggs.
general store there that
There was
you
two
could get?
stores there,
Okay.
and they had pretty much kind of like what you'd call well, like Walmart. I mean, they sold everything from shoes and clothing and groceries. I mean, you could get
Yeah,
about anything you needed, really. And so,
material to sew,
yeah.
Mhm.
things like that.
And like I said, coming to Shan I came to Shan kind of a little more often because my uncle came to Shan, and he just lived a little ways from me, and I rode a lot of times to Shan with him. But other than that, folks didn't come too often.
So what kind of automobile did you ride in, do you remember?
My Uncle Ray had a Model A, and my folks had I think, a 31 Chevy. And well, that's,
And they had gas barrels at the farmhouse and,
well, what I was telling someone the other day, that what I remember as a kid was, my dad had an F-12 farm oil tractor, and we bought gasoline from the Westboro, and he had two 50-gallon barrels on a stand, and they'd come out with the tank wagon, and they'd open up the back doors, and on the back door was a dial that had 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 on it. I don't know how far it went. And then there was a little lever. They'd run in 5-gallon in a can, and then they'd pour it in the barrel then, and they'd mark up 5-gallon. Then they'd run another 5-gallon.
that's how they measured how much they
That's
gave you.
measure how much gas we had,
Okay,
or fuel.
very
And I
interesting.
remember when Dad bought this F-12, it was on, of course, steel wheels, and he got a 2-row cultivator and a mounted 2-row planter for $385. Of course, that F-12 was about 25 horsepower too, maybe a little more, but not much.
And so how many acres was he?
Dad had
planting on that?
110 acres there, wasn't it? Yeah, 110 acres. And my dad also done electrical work on the sideline a little later on.
Okay,
When electricity started coming to the rural area, well, he wired a lot of houses around the Northborough and Westborough area.
okay, so during that time, do you remember, if your dad had kind of a side job as doing some electrical work? Do you remember others?
Well, it said he farmed, and then he
Mhm,
kind of done the
mhm.
electrical work in his spare time, I guess
Mhm.
you'd say. And then I can remember too, Dad had a Fordson tractor. The very first tractor I can remember was a Fordson tractor. And I remember the steering wheel seemed to me like it was that big around and made of wood. And I remember sitting on his lap and getting to hang on the steering wheel because I couldn't about turn it. There wasn't no power steering then.
Mhm.
But I think we was pulling about a 10-foot disc behind it, so times have changed.
Very much. And Beth, what about when you were growing up? Do you remember what your folks were doing during?
Well, after we lived in town for a while, and my dad carried ice. At that time, you had the ice boxes, and he delivered ice to the houses. And then after that, he bought a grinder, and he would go to the farms and grind feed for people's livestock or their chickens or something. And like I say, Mother had always had quite a few chickens, and at one time she even sold eggs to, was it Barry's Hatchery over
Yeah.
at Clarinda? She'd sell eggs, and they'd set them then, and sell chickens from them. She always had a big strawberry patch. That was one thing. She was very protective of her strawberry patch. I hardly ever had to pick strawberries because she was afraid I'd step on one. But she always had a lot of strawberries, and she I don't know that she got money for it, but she and my aunts did quite a bit of wallpapering. They were very good at it, and usually she had several sisters, so it was kind of as much as anything kind of in the family. But if you wanted to change the decor of your house, you bought some wallpaper, which at that time you could buy for 5 or 10 cents a roll. So it didn't cost a lot, but then that might have been quite a bit then. And so I remember that. And then we moved to the farm, and that's where we had the chickens and things. But when we were in town, well, that's what Dad did then. And then he just farmed 80 acres, though.
Okay. And then you mentioned sisters then. How big a family did you have then?
My mother had a large
okay.
family. I just had one
Okay.
brother.
Okay.
But she came from a family of 9, and she had 7, well, there were 7
So most of
women.
those were close around.
They were at the time, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So on Sundays then, did you have a family dinner?
Oh, yes.
Big family dinner? Why
Almost
don't you
every,
tell us about
almost
that?
every Sunday, we got together. And I have always been close to my cousins because they were all there, and that's who I played with most of the time, you know. And one Sunday we'd go to one house and another Sunday to another house, you know. And it usually was fried chicken. And my mother's sisters were very good cooks, so it was a treat.
And Randall, what about your family? Other siblings?
I got a brother and 2 sisters.
And can you remember, did you play with them, or did others come over to your?
We had some neighbor boys that we played with. I remember one neighbor, we had an old horse buggy that we took the tongue off of it and put a seat on it. And south of our place where I was raised, we had a big long hill, and we'd go down that hill on this buggy. But I suppose most of the time my brother and I played, I guess, as much as anything. But,
Well, you talked about the winter time. Did you sled then
Oh,
on
yeah.
the hills and everything?
We
What'd
had-
you use for sleds?
well, I had a regular sled.
Okay.
Right south of our house was a big long hill, and if the conditions was right, there was a bridge about an 1/8 mile on north of our house, and you could come down this hill and you could go clear to the West Tark Bridge if the conditions was right. But
So-
it was that long walk back up the hill.
So was that hill good enough to attract the neighbor kids to all come
Yeah.
to it?
Mhm.
So that's how you spent your day
Yeah.
when it was great.
Yeah.
Well, even some neighborhood families came
Well, yeah.
in the evening sometimes, and the kids
Oh.
played on the hills.
Then did you build a bonfire and?
Oh, maybe on occasions we did. I remember in the wintertime, my folks kind of had a card group, and it was about 4 families, and we'd kind of rotate, usually on a Saturday evening, and they'd go play cards.
And as kids, did you go with them then
Yeah,
and
we
played with
went
the
and
other
just
kids? Mhm.
played with other kids there and just killed time, you know.
My folks also had a card group that they belonged to. And like you said, we went along and just played games then while they played their cards.
Do you remember what kind of games you played? Were they board games, or were you outdoors until
No, we
the
weren't
sun?
out. We weren't out. We
Okay,
weren't
this was
outdoors.
mostly in the winter. then?
Uh-huh. Mostly in the wintertime, yeah, when they weren't busy, you know. No, it seems to me like Chinese checkers, things like that, board games.
Yeah, checkers.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about Christmas. Were the gifts that you had, do you remember, did you make gifts for your folks and give them, or was it pretty much just from the folks to you? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I imagine once we got in school, probably we made things from school. Most schools do. I remember the one Christmas, I know the folks didn't have a lot of money, and my dad made me a little table and chairs, painted them blue, and that was a real treat for me. Like I said, I enjoyed playing with little dishes, so that was real nice. But I can't remember whether we made them anything or not.
Here was one Christmas I remember.
Oh, you wrote a letter to Santa Claus here, and Randall said, "I'm a good boy. I get wood for my mother." See, you forgot to tell us that. "I want an oil truck and an oil station." Doris, I assume a sister. Doris wants a dollhouse. I am 5 years old. From Claude Randall Apperson. Very good,
Well,
and they
you
saved the
gotta-
paper.
You gotta read this
Oh,
down
and then
here.
his want is granted. Santa leaves an oil truck for Claude Randall Apperson. There's one lad who may feel sure there is a Santa Claus and that he can be reached through the columns of the Evening Sentinel. Claude Randall Apperson of Northborough wrote a letter to good old St. Nick, which was published. The boy said he wanted an oil truck for Christmas. Santa eventually evidently saw it, for right away he got in touch with Dale Priest, new manager of a standard service station here, and Mr. Priest brought it to the Evening Sentinel, where it awaits the boy.
I remember that truck.
You remember that Christmas and getting that?
About that long.
Very good. And so you did, your parents did subscribe to the Evening Sentinel? Or,
Evidently.
so very good. And had you write to him? So in the evening after dinner then, you suppose they sat down and read that and read it to you, or do you remember?
I don't really remember.
Do you remember them doing any reading after dinner, or?
Oh, I'm sure they did,
And-
you know.
My parents did. They read a lot.
Mhm.
And we went to the library quite a bit, and they got books too, you know, so
Okay.
they read after supper.
And the library was in Northborough? Was there a local one?
No,
or
we did come to
you had-
Shan
you came to
occasionally.
Shenandoah for that,
mhm.
okay. Mhm. Very good. Say, all right, you said that you had walked to school. Were there school buses then, or did everyone was close enough to walk to their country school?
Well, I walked to school till I was in the last half of the 8th grade, and then I went to Northborough, and I graduated from Northborough. And what we was talking about, of course, this wasn't in the 30s, but
Mm-hmm.
when I went to Northborough, Kenneth Reed, that run the Midway station there down on 59, had a car. And he picked us up and took us into school, and we was commenting that we sat about 3 deep in his car, and how they wouldn't do that nowadays.
No, they wouldn't. So, what did you bring to share?
Oh,
Some things?
this was just a picture of myself, and that's when I was in first grade, and a friend, and then that was my brother.
Okay, so did you always wear dresses
Oh,
then?
yes. And if it was cold, you wore long socks, maybe even long underwear.
But still no pants underneath the
No,
dresses
no,
or anything? Just the
uh-uh.
dresses?
Not
and-
at that time,
uh-huh,
anyway.
uh-huh.
No. And then this was the house I lived in Northborough. I guess when I first started to school, that must have been about, 37, 38. It was that.
I see a clothesline there. Do you remember anything about wash day, or were you a Monday wash day
Oh,
family?
yes,
and
oh, yes.
Was everyone
You always
still doing
washed
that?
on Monday, and you usually ironed on Tuesday, and, you know, the rest of clean and that sort of thing. I'm sure Mother we had a basement there, and I'm sure she washed in the basement. But I can remember my grandmother had washed out in well, they called it the wash house, you know, and the water had to be heated, you know, and carried out to the machine, and then hung on the line, and you didn't have any other way to do it. It had to be hung on the line. And and hers was a gasoline run washing machine.
One of those ringer? or-
It still was a
okay.
ringer type, and that's all I remember of my mother having was the ringer type. And I don't remember whether it was electric or not, but probably was by that time. and you always had the two tubs, you know, you rinsed them in one tub and then they went over and rinsed them again. So, and about everything had to be ironed too, because it was the kind of material that if you didn't, it was really rough or, you know, really wrinkled. So, so that's about all I remember about Wash Day. One of the things I remember about when we lived, when I was in first grade, was we lived on a farm that the electricity we had was provided by what they call a wind charger. I suppose today it's the modern turbines, but and the electricity went into batteries that were in this little shed close to the house. And I imagine we had a refrigerator and probably light bulbs, but other than that, I don't remember anything else, you know. Because I know we had a cook stove, you know, with wood for a long time, for quite a while. So I'm sure that's the way that was. But we had that wind charger. I remember that.
Well, and you said that electricity was coming around that time, but you had a wood stove then too?
Yeah. And I said, as long as I was home, we never had an indoor bathroom. We always had them outside. And if I remember right, our wash, where we washed clothes and everything, that was where we took baths and heated the water and took it out there in tubs, and that's where because we just lived in a small four-room house.
So were we talking the one bath a week, your bath before Sunday?
Pretty much.
Before you went to church on Sunday? What about church on Sunday? Did you go as a family if you attended the church
My
in
family
town?
did, yes. And like you say, you laid out your clothes the night before, and you did wear special clothes to church, and usually the shoes had to be polished the night before also, and our bathing facilities until my folks got a bathroom was in front of the oven door of the stove, and usually the littlest one got the first bath, and then it kind of went on down, you know.
And then I saw one of these pictures. The little girl had a purse. So when you went to church, did you have a nickel
Usually.
or something for the,
Yes.
for the offering?
Usually had Sunday school, you know, and we took our Sunday school money, usually
Okay.
in that.
And was that money that your folks had given you then, or did you get it by doing odd chores or something?
They must have given it to me. I don't remember just how I got it.
Any Sunday memories for you, Randall?
My folks never did go to church
Okay.
much. Maybe on special occasions like Christmas or Easter or something like that. And I guess I was, until I met her, well, I didn't go to church much.
So did you have the Sunday family dinners, though, that your
No,
family, did you
not,
have other family around?
Not really.
Okay.
We, not saying we didn't once in a while, but not on a regular basis. And my grandmother just lived a little ways from us, and a lot of times we'd go up there once in a while, but not, like I said, not on a regular basis. Anyway. But, Sunday was just Sunday, I guess.
What else do we have here?
Oh, this is my mother's family. Like I said, she
Okay.
came from a big family.
All right, and that was one of the times you'd all gotten together.
There's some quite small children in there, so I'm sure I'm one of them.
Well, and then another thing that I've noticed it on some of my relations, most of the gentlemen are in a shirt and tie, and I saw a picture that was a school picture, and
Yes.
the boys were all in shirts and ties. Was that all the time when you went to school, or was it just when you knew you were going to have a picture? Do you know?
Yeah, and maybe Christmas time, but I don't remember wearing a tie every day.
And this is a picture of my parents, apparently, just when they were married, so that's what they were wearing at that time, you know, kind of a, men's haven't changed too much, but the women's have.
Very much so. Very good. You know, as you got a little bit older in the late 30s, what kind of news did you hear about the war over in Europe? Did that start to be dinner topic of conversation?
I remember them talking about it. Other than that, I guess I don't remember too terrible much about it. Other than just talking about it. And listening to the radio to see what was going on, you know.
Okay, and you did have a radio then that you
Yeah.
listened to, and just in the evening, or?
Mostly in the evening. It was a battery radio at the time, and then after got electricity, but that was in the 40's before we had electricity.
Okay, and was KMA on at that time?
I think so. I won't say for sure.
I'm pretty sure they were.
Well, I think they
Because
were.
I used to go with my grandparents to Shenandoah on Saturday, and my grandmother and I would go down to the Mayfair Theater and watch their live productions, you know.
Okay.
And occasionally we went down to KFNF because they also had entertainment. But I think the entertainment was also their production too, you know, they were also on the air. So I think they were on the air when we got electricity. I guess the first thing I remember about news off the radio, and this goes into the early 40's, was when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And my dad was listening to the radio, you know, and commented on that, you know, that we were in for something now, you know. And for the radio, I always like to come home from school and listen to I know Captain Midnight was one of them, but I can't remember what the others were. You know, they usually had these little serial radio things on after school.
Oh.
They usually were about a half hour.
The Lone Ranger.
Oh, yeah, the Lone Ranger was one of them.
So you'd come home from school and just sit by the radio and listen to them?
Until it was chore time.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
That was a big deal then.
Yeah, it was.
Anything else you can think of that, other memories that you might have had?
Well, I also remember coming to Shannon and going to Mayfair and also KFNF and seeing their live productions. And I can still see the stars in the Mayfair Theater that they had in the ceiling.
Quite a production.
Yeah.
Was.
A lot of times, because of the farming community that we're in, the Depression and the economy didn't affect us quite as much. But can you remember if people in town or any of your relatives, if they had to take in boarders, or if they did a lot of bartering in those days? You know, lots of times you'd exchange your services for each other.
I don't remember of that. Like I said, we usually took our produce to town and sold it, and then bought what groceries we could.
From that profit.
What I do remember, though, is we had neighbors when you thrashed, 4 or 5 neighbors. You all worked at everybody's place until you got the job done, which nobody neighbors anymore. But,
And then did the women feed you all then at
No.
lunch from that, so they all got together?
and I used to ride a horse and carry a water jug around to the field, and so they had water. Doing that.
My aunt lived right beside us in Northborough when we were living in Northborough, and she had a fairer size house, and it probably was during the Depression. I know they were kind of strapped for money. Anyway, they kind of divided their house in two, and they rented it to another family. One family lived on this side, and one family lived on that side. That's about all I remember about that. I was thinking something else, and it left me, so.
Anything else you can think of that you want to share?
I guess not really.
I think that did pretty well.
I had a question about politics. Were your parents very active in politics, or do you remember any big names coming to the area that you guys went to see or heard about?
I don't really remember any offhand, anyway.
No, I don't either, and I don't think it was something that was discussed too much.
Wasn't that, so did they go vote? Were they?
Oh, I'm sure they
I'm
did.
sure they did, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure they did.
It must have been the same party because they went to.
Yeah. Well, for quite a while, my grandmother didn't vote, though. I don't know whether Grandpa didn't think she should or what, but I know it was quite a while before she ever went to vote, so. And she didn't drive, so if she got there, he would had to take her. And why that was, I don't know, but I know she didn't vote for quite a while.
I remember when Mom and Dad first got married, they was telling me that my dad worked in a candy factory in St. Joe. And they decided that they was going to make some candy one evening. So Dad got a recipe then to make some candy, and it started out with 50 pounds of sugar. So they didn't know where they could get that cut down to make a little batch of ice or candy or not. I know them laughing about that. It started out with 50 pounds of sugar.
Well, talking about the Depression, when I came along, apparently my folks were in pretty good shape, and I got my vaccinations and everything. But when my brother came along, that was 5 years later, they didn't think they had the money to vaccinate him for whooping cough. And he got the whooping cough when he was, I don't know how old he was, probably 3 or 4, and would cough and cough and cough. And Mother would go out to take care of the chickens, and she'd tell me to stay with him, and if he coughed so much that he had to vomit, to hold something for him, Well, that worked out fine, except that Mother had to clean up after me then.
So we found out how important the vaccinations
Yes.
were then.
Yeah.
Okay, and so did the doctor come to the house? Do you remember
No,
that?
I don't remember the
They still-
doctor ever
okay.
coming to our house. We always went
Okay.
to Shenandoah at that time. I'm pretty sure it was probably Dr. Bunch at that time, but
Okay.
no, we came to Shenandoah. There was a doctor in Cloyne at one time and one in Westboro, but that was kind of before our day, wasn't it? Yeah.
I had my tonsils out when I was about 5 years old. I was reading.
7 or 8 or
7
something.
or 8. I had that in Prenda, and I remember
And
the
went to
first,
the hospital for that then?
they said the Brown Hospital, and I didn't ever remember a Brown Hospital in Prenda, but I do remember Dr. Frankel was his name. I remember that, and I remember the first thing I got after having my tonsils out was ice cream.
The same cure we have today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Any others?
No, don't think so.
Okay, thank you very, very much. That was very interesting.